Thank you, Franz Ephraim Katzir of the Sephardic Heritage International Organization, SHIN, and the Multicultural Jewish Arts Museum for sponsoring the 2024 Annual Congressional Commemoration for Holocaust Remembrance Day. And special thanks to members of Congress for taking time from your very busy day to honor those who perished in the Holocaust and to honor the 240,000 remaining survivors of the worst genocide in world history. Thanks to the work of SHIN, we recognize the Holocaust was not only an Ashkenazi catastrophe, but also a Sephardic one, where Sephardic communities in Greece, the Balkans, areas of Amsterdam, and even in Vienna were destroyed.
Welcome, everyone. Members of Congress, honored guests, friends. My name is Ephraim Katzir, and I welcome you to the Sephardic Heritage International 6th Congressional Holocaust Commemoration. We have a hybrid audience today, so we are not only in person on the Hill, but also connecting with participants all over the US and around the world. I would like to begin by thanking our congressional sponsors listed on the program and all members of Congress and staffers who are here today. Our heartfelt appreciation also goes out to our community partners, the generations after. In particular, thank you. This annual commemoration serves to remember the perished, honor survivors, and provide an opportunity to stand against anti-Semitism and hate. Today's art exhibition, presented by the Multicultural Jewish Arts Museum, MJAM, also honors the 25th anniversary of the signing of the landmark Washington Principles of Nazi Confiscated Art, which broadens the prospects for Holocaust victims and their heirs to recover stolen art. As part of the program, we'll be receiving remarks from Ambassador Stuart Eizenstat, who, as Undersecretary of State, negotiated the Washington Principles with 44 countries. The Coming Out of Hiding exhibition also constitutes a soft launch of SHIN DC's new Multicultural Jewish Arts Museum, aiming to strengthen Jewish diversity by exhibiting and maintaining artworks and hosting concerts that express multi-dimensional Jewish narratives linked to African, Asian, Hispanic, and American Jews and their communities. I'll now continue with some brief background for today's program. The theme is coming out of hiding, because all of the testimonies that we will have from survivors involve going into hiding and then living life after coming out of hiding. We pray, we're also acknowledge the situation that's going on in Gaza. We pray that the war in Gaza achieves its goals quickly, particularly for the hostages to be returned after over 100 days, for the preservation of the lives of innocent people, the neutralization of the threat of Hamas, and also for Palestinians in Gaza to have a way forward with security, stability, and peace. The testimonies and art exhibitions that we are presenting today focus on the Netherlands. In 1940, at the time of the Nazi invasion of the Netherlands, the Jewish population totaled around 160,000 people, of which about 75,000 were residents of Amsterdam. The art exhibition Coming Out of Hiding features images by Anton Witzel, a non-Jewish Dutch artist, documenting a community of Jews who, throughout the Nazi occupation, held regular secret services for Sabbaths and Jewish holidays in Amsterdam at the home of Salomon Mendes Coutinho, the sexton of the Portuguese synagogue. The members of this hidden community, both Ashkenazic and Sephardic, were in mixed marriages under the Nuremberg laws. They lost their civil rights and had to wear the Star of David, but did not face deportation to death camps until after 1942. They survived and came out of hiding. And Reverend Salomon Vazdias, who is on today's program, is a product of the Jewish community in Amsterdam, particularly the Portuguese Jewish community. We now welcome to the podium Congressman Mike Lawler.
Well, good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. And I want to thank the Sephardic Heritage International, DC, for pulling us together today. I know some of my colleagues will be coming and going as the evening progresses. But we just came from a vigil on the steps of the Capitol to mark 103 days since October 7th and the terrorist attack on Israel, the greatest slaughtering of Jews since the Holocaust. And the fact that there are still so many hostages being held, so many families devastated by their absence and their loss. And so this Holocaust Remembrance Day that will be approaching next week serves a special purpose this year, and certainly has greater meaning in light of October 7th. When I was in Israel last year for the 75th anniversary with Speaker McCarthy, we went and looked at the Book of Names and saw the names of over 5 million of the 6 million Jews that were slaughtered during the Holocaust. And it really reminds you how precious and how fragile life truly is, no more so than what occurred on October 7th. In November, I went with Chairman McCall on a congressional delegation visit to Israel. We met with Prime Minister Netanyahu and the leadership in Israel. We met with families of the hostages. We watched a 21-minute video, raw footage of the attacks of October 7th. We watched innocent women, children, babies slaughtered, beheaded, burned. The glee with which Hamas terrorists perpetrated the attack. On the video, we heard a phone call intercepted. A young man, maybe around the age of 20, calling home to his parents in Gaza, celebrating the fact that he just slaughtered 10 Jews with his bare hands. His parents praising Allah. He repeated it over and over and over. That is taught. That level of hatred, that anti-Semitic viewpoint is taught. That's why, as a member of Congress and a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I have focused on two fronts. Passing legislation that will ensure peace and prosperity in the Middle East. The special envoy for the Abraham Accords, which is now law. It was passed in the NDAA. I worked with Congressman Richie Torres of the Bronx on that. The President signed it in December. We passed the SHIP Act to hold Iran accountable, the greatest state sponsor of terrorism. They get their funding from the sale of Iranian petroleum. The SHIP Act would crack down on the purchasers of Iranian petroleum, the greatest purchaser of which is China. In addition, I have focused on anti-Semitism. I've introduced two pieces of legislation to combat that here in the United States. The Stop Anti-Semitism on College Campuses Act, which would defund institutions of higher learning that promote and sanction anti-Semitic events on their campuses, as well as the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act which would require the Department of Education to adopt the IRA working definition and its contemporary examples for all of its discrimination enforcement cases. If we are going to crack down on anti-Semitism, it must start in our universities, where they are teaching our children to hate Jews, to hate Israel. And we must stand with our ally Israel. I will never waver in my support of Israel. People act like 1948 is the first year in history. 1948 is a culmination of a history of Jews being persecuted and slaughtered, and the need for a Jewish state to protect the Jewish people. I will always stand by the right of the Jewish state to exist and the right of the Jewish people to practice their faith. So as we commemorate this Holocaust Remembrance Day, let us never forget, and let us ensure that this never happens again. God bless.
Thank you, Congressman Lawler, for your most fitting words, and we never forget. That's why we're here. We'll now move on to our next speaker. We'll have Congressman Greg Landsman.
Good evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Greg Landsman. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. And any Ohioans here? There you go. Thank you. As we approach Holocaust Remembrance Day at the end of this month, and as we stand here today, over 100 days since October 7th, I think it's 103 days of Israelis being held hostage and this war with Hamas in Gaza, it is a time for solemn reflection. This reflection revolves around remembering the 6 million Jews that lost their lives during the Holocaust, but also renewing our commitment to the promise of never again. But what does that mean in today's context, in the context in which we are living today? I am Jewish, and I have a master's in theological studies. I think there's only a few of us in Congress. And I've studied religion and Judaism, the role it plays in our lives, domestically, abroad, war, peace. And there's so much to be said about the significance of never again. The horrific crimes of the Holocaust, as you all know, did not arise in a vacuum. They were preceded by years of anti-Semitic propaganda that demonized Jews, dehumanized Jews, and convinced people that we were a threat to society. Today, we are witnessing a distressing, arguably unprecedented rise of extremism and anti-Semitism here and around the world. And it is not dissimilar to the kind of blood libel and the types of conspiracies that led to the Holocaust. Calls for the end or destruction of Israel, but also, perhaps more dangerously, the conspiracies around genocidal intent and the ascribing of the worst of society to Jews and to Israeli leaders. Yet in these times of tension, we are also building opportunities for togetherness and education. We reflect on our collective duty to speak out against all forms of bigotry and persecution. We know all too well the consequences of others staying silent. Honoring the victims of the Holocaust means having the courage to condemn anti-Semitism and condemn the wrongfulness wherever it occurs. I was in Israel in April and again in August, went through the Book of Names both times. I thought in the first time I would find maybe one or two Landsmans. It was pages of Landsmans. And I know for me, for them, my children, the incredible responsibility that I have to speak up, to speak out, and perhaps more importantly, to live out the values of our Jewish community. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Landsman. We now have remarks from Congressman Josh Gottheimer.
Good evening. Thank you for welcoming me here this evening. It's an honor to spend time with you. I'm humbled, not just to be with my colleagues, and I know you've heard from so many, to remember the Holocaust and honor those taken and celebrate our survivors. It's an honor to be with some of the survivors here tonight, and their strength and resiliency, I think, strengthens all of us. It's good to see, I didn't see some of my colleagues here, Kathy and Dan. Thank you for both of your leadership. I should have acknowledged you right off the bat, so thank you. Thank you both. We remember today the 6 million Jews and millions murdered during the Shoah. We must always remember the Holocaust, of course, and recommit ourselves to the lessons learned. And we know today, unfortunately, as time passes and generations come, the memory of direct contact is further and further away, which makes what happened on October 7th, I think, so much, unfortunately for so many, I think so many of us feel, how could people not understand the connectivity between these two? How could people not understand that the Shoah was like yesterday, just a few years back? And then you see an atrocity like October 7th, which is beyond heinous, and you realize not only could it happen again, but in many ways it has continued. Both the treatment of Jews in America and around the world, but of course, how quickly people are to forget, right? The statistics about those who don't have no knowledge, or have forgotten, or have recreated the realities of what happened at the Shoah. And then we see just now people immediately recreating what happened on October 7th. Sorry, I didn't see you too, Congressman. On October 7th. And you realize that if we as a community don't stand up and shape and remind people not just what happened during the Holocaust, but what happened on October 7th, if we don't do that, years from now when we're meeting in this room, we will not just be standing together and saying we have to educate young people, next generation, about the Holocaust and the facts of the Holocaust, but that we'll have to actually educate our country about what happened on October 7th. And frankly, that's what I'm worried about when I see how quickly, because of social media and because of disinformation that we're facing in the world today, how quickly these things can be reshaped. But what you all know better than me, or better than my colleagues, is what happened during the Holocaust. What happened to millions and millions and millions of people of all ages. So I just want to say to you, thank you for giving us a forum today to remember, but also to remember our responsibility, our solemn responsibility, not just today, but for tomorrow as well. And with that, I will say thank you. We will continue to educate. We've got legislation like the HEAL Act and others which are committed to education. But the one thing that you can't educate people about is in here without actually the work it takes from all of you and from all of us. So God bless you, and God bless your families. God bless and continue to watch over you. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Gottheimer. We now welcome Congressman Daniel Goldman to the podium to share his remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having us to, I think, what is probably the first of several events to commemorate Holocaust Remembrance Day. This one has a particular soft spot in my heart because my wife is Sephardic, Moroccan, member of the Moroccan Sephardic Synagogue in Manhattan. And so many of the stories of so many Sephardic and other Jews who went to such heroic efforts to try to save people during the Holocaust live on today. I am also the grandson of a young Russian baby who, with her 5 older brothers and mother, escaped the pogroms in the early 1920s and came here through Ellis Island, settled down first in Baltimore and then Washington, escaping anti-Semitism that ultimately would lead to the greatest genocide, the worst genocide in history. I also have the honor of being a representative of Borough Park in Brooklyn, which has the largest population of Holocaust survivors and their families in this country. When I grew up, from my grandmother, from so many survivors of the Holocaust, I would hear stories. I would hear awful stories, not only about the Holocaust, but about the anti-Semitism that has pervaded this world for our entire history. But it was always history. As an American Jew growing up here, I frankly did not feel a lot of anti-Semitism. But we are all now living the anti-Semitism. We're all now living a new history after October 7th. And it puts in such stark repute how important it is that we do never forget, that we insist on making sure that we are educating all of the people in this country and elsewhere about what happened during the Holocaust. Because what is so striking to me about the surge in anti-Semitism after the worst genocidal attack on Jews since the Holocaust, and instead of coming to the defense of Jews, as we would expect so many of our allies to do, there's been a surge in anti-Semitism. And what is so troubling about it is that it comes so clearly from a lack of understanding, a lack of education, a lack of context, and a lack of perspective. And that is exactly what we need to do with Holocaust Remembrance Day and with Holocaust education throughout our country. And I'm proud to have joined Josh's bill, the HEAL Act, which, if it's bipartisan, it should pass, if it could ever get to the floor, would provide substantial support for Holocaust education around the country. The theme of tonight's event is coming out of hiding, and I was thinking about that a little bit because I have 2 daughters who wear Jewish star necklaces, and I've had to have conversations with them about whether they should continue to wear them, whether they should hide them. I've had conversations with many friends who have considered taking their mezuzahs off their door. And in the end, I come to the conclusion that we cannot recede into the shadows. We cannot hide anymore. We have to lean in. We have to push forward. We have to work hard to engage and to make our values, our history, our culture, our religion understood by everybody else. And we as a identity, as Jews, have always persevered. And we must and we will persevere again. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Congressman Goldman. We're always happy to make a Moroccan Jewish Sephardic connection. We now welcome Congresswoman Kathy Manning, who is also the co-chair of the House Bipartisan Task Force for Combating Anti-Semitism, to share our remarks.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Kathy Manning. I represent North Carolina's 6th District, and it is my privilege to serve as vice-ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and I serve on the Middle East Subcommittee. And also, it is my privilege to serve as co-chair of the House Bipartisan Task Force to Combat Anti-Semitism. And I can tell you, I never thought we would have so much work to do when I agreed to take on that task force. I never thought that anti-Semitism would be rising at the rate that it's rising today. But I want to take a moment to first thank the Sephardic Heritage International for organizing this event, for giving us the opportunity to bring survivors together so that we can hear about what they endured, learn from the stories, because those stories are more relevant than ever today. We all know we stand here nearly 79 years after the liberation of Auschwitz. We stand here to remember 6 million innocent Jews, including 1 million children, who were killed by the Nazis and their collaborators. And let's not forget who the collaborators were. They were ordinary people. They were friends, they were neighbors, they were colleagues who stood silently by while the worst genocide in history took place. I think it's very appropriate that this year's commemoration theme is coming out of hiding, a theme to honor survivors who were forced into hiding during the Holocaust and then were not just able but willing to live openly as Jews after the defeat of the Nazis. I want to recognize the immense bravery and resilience of the survivors who came out of hiding and continue to live as Jews, because their ability to live once again as Jews, to share the Jewish faith, to share their ancestry, after enduring the pain of the Holocaust is really extraordinary. Because, as I said, today we are seeing a rise in anti-Semitism that many of us thought would never be possible again. And I have to tell you, I stand here with a heavy heart because I've spent the day meeting with the families, not just of hostages, but the families of girls and young women who have been held captive for 103 days since they were captured on October 7th, which of course is the most infamous day since the Holocaust because of the Hamas terrorist attack, where, as we all now know, thousands of Hamas terrorists invaded Israel, slaughtered, sexually assaulted, mutilated, and burned more than 1,200 people. And hearing these stories reminds us of what happened during the Holocaust. It seems unthinkable that in the light of this horrific attack, we should see an increase in anti-Semitism, but that is exactly what is happening. And we are seeing Jews putting themselves in hiding. We are seeing young Jews who are taking off their Star of David necklaces, who are changing the names on their Uber app so that drivers won't see Jewish last names. And I'm hearing from college students who are afraid to go on birthright trips unless they're promised that no pictures will be shown of them on those trips because they're afraid when they go back to school, they will be ostracized. When I was home this last weekend, I was hearing about the harassment of middle school students who are being taunted with Holocaust jokes. As we look for explanations, we need to understand that so many people today, 60% of young people, don't know about the Holocaust. They don't know what happened. And I have to tell you, sadly, many of my colleagues don't understand what anti-Semitism is or why we should be concerned about it. But we all know that anti-Semitism is a centuries-old shape-shifting evil that blames the Jews for whatever the evils of society are. And when anti-Semitism takes root, the consequences are deadly, not just for the Jews, but for everyone in society. I want to tell you, as we grapple with the surge of anti-Semitism, and I am working on legislation with my colleagues to make sure we have the education we need, we take the steps to implement what's in the first ever U.S. national strategy to combat anti-Semitism. We must pass critical legislation in Congress, but we must continue to hear the stories from survivors so that we can bring alive today what happened when anti-Semitism went unchecked. I want to thank you to the Sephardic Heritage International. I want to tell you how important this ceremony is and pledge to you that I will continue to do everything I can in Congress to make sure that never again has real meaning. Thank you all.
Thank you, Congresswoman Manning. We appreciate your pledge very much. We'll now hear from Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who is the founder and co-chair of the Interparliamentary Task Force to Combat Online Anti-Semitism.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's really moving and an honor to join you today to observe International Holocaust Remembrance Day. I am so grateful to the Sephardic Heritage International for organizing this commemoration, and I'm really heartened that the room is full and to be surrounded by friends and colleagues who understand the gravity of this situation and this moment. Gathering today, we honor the 6 million Jews who were murdered in the Holocaust and the countless millions of others who perished at the hands of the Nazis and their collaborators. We also pay tribute to those who resisted persecution under totalitarian rule, including and especially non-Jews who recognized our personhood and fought against oppression. We look back because we cannot forget. We cannot avert our eyes from the horror that humanity is capable of inflicting. And unfortunately, that is not a long ago occurrence. We see that happening before our very eyes in this moment. We look back to learn from the darkness of the past. And as so many Jews have come together repeatedly to say, the idea is to make sure that we never see those atrocities repeated again. When people doubt the truth of the Holocaust to begin with, the forewarning words, "never forget," lose all meaning. But as we reflect on the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, we look ahead to an uncertain future and contemplate the unthinkable rise in anti-Semitism in the United States and around the world. The fact that Holocaust and denial are words still paired and uttered together by too many testifies to what we still owe to all those who were lost in this most horrific moment of human history. Now, with the global Jewish community reeling from the deadliest, most sickening attack since World War II, and under siege from a wave of hatred, we must, and we have, spring into action. We must challenge institutions, organizations, and our own leaders to confront their role in the continued perpetuation of anti-Semitism in the modern era. We must take ambitious actions to end Holocaust denial through education. The growing ignorance surrounding the Holocaust and unchecked anti-Semitism among younger people is jaw-dropping. And the avalanche of rabid anti-Semitism masked with activist slogans is reprehensible. We owe it to those who paid the ultimate price to inoculate one another from bigotry and salt the soil where it flourishes. It is very fitting that this event's theme is coming out of hiding. As anti-Semitic incidents are on the rise, an AJC survey found that in 2022, 23% of Jews, as my colleague Kathy Manning mentioned, avoided publicly wearing or displaying items that embraced their Judaism out of fear of being the target of an anti-Semitic attack. It is unacceptable that the Jewish community has to fear for our safety if we want to wear the Star of David or a kippah. Countering this hate requires efforts both in person and online, where hate has gone unchecked, racing virally around the internet for too long. As a founder of the Interparliamentary Task Force to Combat Online Anti-Semitism, I'm proud to lead efforts to disrupt the endless proliferation of hate on social media, the effects of which we see at our schools, on our streets, and in our most prestigious institutions. The Holocaust did not begin with the gas chambers. It began in the public square, with dehumanization and conspiracy breeding double standards and second-class citizenship. Now our public square is online, and many of us watch helplessly as thread after thread is contaminated with Jew hatred. We must also embrace Jewish history and celebrate the contributions of the Jewish people to the United States and the world, and we must celebrate each other, because our very presence here today is a miracle. And that's why we must band together and embrace real solutions. We do that by speaking with one voice, in partnership with Jews and non-Jews alike, to reject the resurrection of anti-Semitism and embrace truth and honor our collective memory. We cannot accept the denial or reversion of the Holocaust, which Elie Wiesel pointedly called a double killing. We cannot abide public figures, politicians, or parties parroting anti-Semitic tropes and conspiracies that we know from history result in the death and harm of Jews. And we cannot afford legitimacy to those who blame the Jews for their own destruction or who draw false equivalence between the Jewish community's defenders and attackers. The scale of the challenge that we face is unprecedented, but I am grateful to have partners who share my and our dedication to securing the dignity and rights of the Jewish people and ending the scourge of anti-Semitism. I know that together today we will reclaim some measure of justice for the millions who died in the name of hatred. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz. Yes, we need to celebrate the Jewish people, celebrate each other, and certainly we do need to work together. I appreciate that very much. We now welcome Congressman Tom Keane to the podium to share his remarks.
Thank you for the opportunity to join you today as we gather to recognize Holocaust Remembrance Day. The Holocaust was one of the darkest chapters in human history, when man committed unspeakable crimes against his neighbor. It is the responsibility of our generation and the generations to come to recognize the survivors who have borne witness to the horrors of genocide and have shown us the strength of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable evil. It is our responsibility to ensure that future generations learn the lessons of the Holocaust and that we stand up against anti-Semitism whenever and wherever it appears. Unfortunately, we see today that Israel and the Jewish people are once again engaged in a fight for survival following Hamas's evil, unprovoked, and cowardly attacks on October 7th, in which over 1,200 Israelis lost their lives. It saddens me to see the wave of anti-Semitism that has ensued from an attack that should have been easily, universally condemned by all peoples and all nations. We must stand with Israel and her right to defend herself. Thank you, everyone Thank you for everyone here who has organized this event, who has brought us together It is important that the Sephardic Heritage International in DC has launched the Multicultural Jewish Arts Museum. The theme of this event, coming out of hiding, truly has new meaning as Jewish and Israeli people come under attack across the globe. We must stand together and hold to the promise of never again. Thank you.
We thank Congressman Keane for his remarks, and we welcome Congressman D'Esposito to now come up to the podium to share his remarks.
Well, thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. As we prepare to recognize Holocaust Remembrance Day, we must think to ourselves that every day should be Holocaust Remembrance Day. When I think about the days ahead and think about this day that we mark each year on our calendar, we must focus on the opportunity. For me, the opportunity that God, that Hashem has given me. My ability as a proud servant of the National Holocaust Museum. The opportunity it gives me to provide resources in every single corner of this nation to make sure that our young people understand the atrocities of the Holocaust, to make sure that it never, ever happens again. The opportunity that I have serving in the United States House of Representatives Knesset Parliamentary Work Group, sharing information, sharing intelligence, having conversations with our elected partners in Israel to make sure that Holocausts never happen again. To make sure that I use the opportunity as an elected representative to provide every single resource necessary to Israel, our greatest ally, so that they and we can succeed in this time. The opportunity and the theme of tonight, the theme of coming out of hiding. And many of my colleagues have shared the thoughts about coming out of hiding as Jewish Americans. Well, I am not Jewish. I grew up as a Roman Catholic. But I do represent probably the largest Jewish district of any member of Congress in the House of Representatives in New York. And prior to serving as a member of Congress, I was a proud New York City detective, going out each and every day to hold those accountable that violated people's trust and shared hate. And as a member of the Town of Hempstead Board, for those of you that know the Town of Hempstead back in New York, it's actually the largest town in the United States of America, bigger than 7 states by population. We were the first town in the nation to put on our books anti-BDS legislation. And not only put it, but then implement it. And I will continue to do that work here in the House of Representatives, and I will tell you that over the last 14 months, I've had the opportunity to visit Israel 3 times. And I will tell you that my Monsignor is getting questionable. That was supposed to be a joke. We're allowed to laugh here tonight. But what it means is that you have members of Congress on both sides of the aisle that are fighting the good fight, that are working each and every day in a bipartisan fashion, and very often we see on TV what looks like chaos. There is some serenity in this chaos, and you have people, you've heard from some of them tonight, working so hard. So as we talk about coming out of hiding, let's also focus on the opportunities that we have to expose those who have been in hiding too long, those full of hate, those anti-Semites, who we will do everything in our power to expose them and make sure that they are out of hiding so that we could see them all and hold them accountable. God bless you all, God bless Israel, and God bless the United States of America.
God bless you all. God bless the United States of America. God bless Israel. Thank you. We are grateful to have members of Congress on both sides of the aisle who are fighting the good fight, as the congressman said, who are allies to the Jewish people and to Israel. We now have remarks from Congresswoman Elise Stefanik.
Hello, this is Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, proud representative of New York's 21st Congressional District and chairwoman of the House Republican Conference. We are together today because never again is now. Since the heinous October 7th attacks on Israel by Hamas terrorists, the world has watched blatant anti-Semitism plague our public places and our institutions of higher education as Jewish and Israeli students across America are being harassed and physically assaulted simply for existing. To unearth the sources of this horrific anti-Semitism on campus, Congress called on university presidents to testify at a now infamous hearing where the world witnessed the morally bankrupt testimonies from the presidents of America's most elite universities. Over 1 billion people have now watched the dehumanizing testimony of the treatment of the Jewish community on Harvard's campus, on Penn's campus, and MIT's campus. While the presidents of Penn and Harvard were forced to resign, the work to achieve accountability is just beginning. In fact, new data from the ADL shows that since October 7th, anti-Semitic incidents have increased 360% since the prior year. The attacks, both personal and physical, that the Jewish community have faced in the last few months have been indicative of the need to remind the world of what horrors human can resort to when we fail to see each other's humanity. That's why I proudly helped lead the bipartisan Never Again Education Act into law to provide teachers across the country with resources and training needed to teach our children about the important lessons of the Holocaust and never again. We must never forget these horrors to ensure that we do not repeat the horrific sins of the past. I commend you all for participating in the Congressional Holocaust Commemoration on the Hill hosted by SHIN DC. I see great value in this year's theme of coming out of hiding, which could not be more reflective of the challenging times the Jewish people are living through today. In the face of the horrific proliferation of anti-Semitism since Hamas's barbaric atrocities and attacks on Israel, Jews, Israelis, and their allies, we must proudly stand up and protect their God-given rights, our God-given rights. I want you all to know that House Republicans are committed to the protection, prosperity, and freedom of the Jewish people. The Education and Workforce Committee has launched a full-fledged investigation into anti-Semitic instances and attacks on colleges and university campuses across the nation. We will uncover the sources of the heinous anti-Semitic plague infesting these colleges and curriculums, and we will root out this hatred. I am proud to support the Jewish community, and I am proud every day to support our great and most precious ally, Israel. As the only democracy in the Middle East, our relationship with Israel is imperative. I am heartbroken to see the pain and hurt our Jewish friends are facing at the hands of Hamas and other Iranian-backed terrorists. However, I am also heartened by the strength of the Jewish people. It has been just over 100 days since Hamas's deadly invasion of Israel, and I continue to faithfully await the safe return of the innocent hostages that remain in Hamas's custody. We will never abandon our commitment to protect and advocate for the Jewish community and our greatest ally, Israel. Thank you, and God bless.
We appreciate Representative Stefanik's remarks and her continued support.
We will now turn the program to our keynote speaker, Louise Lawrence Israëls. She is a Dutch survivor, and she resides in the state of Maryland. She is committed to Holocaust education as a volunteer for the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, and she's also the board member of the Generations After.
Good evening. It's an honor to be with you this evening. My name is Louise Lawrence Israëls, and I am Dutch. I'm also American, but I'm Dutch. My country, the Netherlands, was invaded and occupied in 1940, and May 1940. I was born in 1942 in the town of Haarlem, what is about 15 miles away from Amsterdam. And my parents lived a quiet life with my 2-year-older brother in a small house. Their big life that they had before the Nazis invaded the Netherlands became smaller and smaller because more and more restrictions came to Jewish families and to Jews. And I had, of course, no idea what was going on, and neither really did my brother. When I was 6 months old, things changed drastically for Jews in the Netherlands. We got orders to move from the town of Haarlem to Amsterdam. The Nazis had gotten the trains ready for deportations of Dutch Jews to the death camps in Poland. And also, Jews above the age of 6 were ordered to wear bright yellow stars with the word Jood, what means Jew, in the middle of it. My brother and I did not wear a star because we did not have that age, but my parents most certainly did. And when the orders came to move to Amsterdam, my parents realized that we could not live in the open anymore. It was just too dangerous. My father had some really good friends who had joined the Dutch resistance, the underground. And he could trust them, but it was a very special thing during that time, because you could have been friends with your neighbors, and your neighbors could have turned collaborator. But with the help of these heroes, these trusted friends, my father was able to find a hiding place for our family. My father, my mother, my mom's best friend, who was a neighbor across the street in the town of Haarlem, who stayed with us, and my brother and myself. The hiding place was a storage attic right in the middle of the city, and fortunately it was across the street from the main park in Amsterdam, the Vondelpark. What meant that my father, it was easier for my father to leave the hiding place, and he would have to, because we needed food, we needed medicine, and whatever else we needed, what he used to get after curfew, through his trusted friends. Now, I need to go back to his friends, part of the underground. They were true heroes. They knew that helping a Jewish family could mean death to them, or beatings, or thrown in jail, or sent to a concentration camp. It was so forbidden by the Nazis for anybody to help Jews. They stood up and decided it was important to help somebody in need. So they risked their lives. They knew exactly what they were doing, and a lot of them were killed and or sent to a camp and never came back. But they helped us anyway. So by not having neighbors across the street, my father was able to sneak out at night and contact his friends and try to get as much of the list that they had made up during the day of what we needed. I have a picture of the row house in Amsterdam, and we were all the way on the top. It was a true storage attic, and my parents really had to figure out what to take in, what we could need. They had no idea when we went in if it was going to be for a week, a month, a year, and it happened to be for 2.5 years. So they took mattresses for the adults, and my brother, my 2-year-old brother, and a crib for me. I was only 6 months old. There was a table and chair stored in the attic, and there was a cupboard with some utensils. There was no kitchen. There was no bathroom with a shower or a tub. There was a small toilet, and the toilet did have a small sink with cold running water. So my mom decided to bring in a camping stove, some oil lamps, because if there was anything to cook, it had to be done on something, so that was done on a camping stove. I'm sure they also boiled diapers, because of course I was still in diapers, on that camping stove. They took some utensils, and they took as many warm clothing and blankets as they could get through people from the resistance from the underground. My father was smart. He figured out I have 2 children and how we're going to keep those children busy. And he took a lot of scrap paper and color pencils and crayons. And I was crawling around in the beginning, and I saw that my father and my mother and my brother and my mom's friend were sitting around the table, and they looked like they were having a decent time, and I wanted to join them. Mom and her friend were always sewing something. The children were growing, and they had to mend our clothes, and they used blankets to make coats or robes for us to keep us warm in the winter, because it was really very cold living there. It's not very well insulated. They played games with us. It was like a form of homeschooling. They taught us colors. They taught us small words. They taught us easy arithmetic. And it was a form of actually homeschooling that they did with us. Since we didn't really do anything else, there were no newspapers, there were no books, there were no toys. Of course, there was no television at that time. There was no radio. There was nothing except for these pieces of paper and the crayons or the color pencils. When we were liberated, I was almost 3, and I could read, because that's all we did. We were taught. We were homeschooled. My father and my mother gave my brother and myself the biggest gift that you can give your children. They never talked to us about the outside world. They were worried. They were worried about their parents. They were worried about their siblings, other relatives, their friends. They had no idea where anybody was, or if they were already deported. But they never talked about their fears with their children. So we didn't know what was going on, and we actually thought that everybody lived in an attic and was most of the time hungry and was cold in the winter, because we didn't know the difference. And that's what they wanted for us. When just before my 2nd birthday, my father had found out from his friends that the Allied Army, the British, the Americans, the Canadians, there was a Jewish brigade from Palestine. Israel didn't exist at that time. And some other people, some free Poles, some free Russians, had joined the Allied Army, and they landed in Normandy in June 1944. He wanted to commemorate that day. It was so important because it was a day, he always said afterwards, that gave him hope, because they had no idea. Every day was scary, and there were a couple of scary moments, but I don't have a couple of hours time to stand here and tell you. But there was a time that my father was followed, and we had, through the underground, fake identity papers. So my name, all during the time of hiding, was actually Maria, and I had no idea that I was Louise Israëls. Everything to keep us safe. But my father wanted to celebrate his new hope, because he thought if the Allied Army has landed, then maybe there will be, we won't have to be in hiding much longer. So they decided to celebrate my 2nd birthday, and it's not so easy to organize a birthday in hiding. It has to be, they needed about a month to do it. My mom cut up an old blouse and made a beautiful birthday dress for me. Her friend made a Raggedy Ann doll for me. And my brother, who had been, he was 2 years old when we went into hiding, and he had been allowed to take one toy. And he had taken a wooden pull horse, a little wooden horse on 4 wheels, that he paraded around if he didn't sit around the table. And I was allowed to look at it, but I was never allowed to touch it. But he was going to wrap it and give it to me on my birthday. One of my father's friends in the underground came with some other things, and he came also with a camera, and he said, we'll take a picture of the birthday girl, and if she survives, then I'll make sure that she has it. So I have that picture, and I'm going to share it with you, but I also want to tell you that my best present was actually my brother's pull horse. I thought, finally, it's mine, and he told me, I want it back tonight. You can only have it for the day. The picture that I'm going to show you is a tribute to my parents. They were worried about everything else, but mostly about their children. And their big wish was that their 2 children should stay together and would survive. So I think that they pretty much succeeded, and what you're going to see is a tribute to them, because you see a perfectly normal girl, 2-year-old girl, that I've been in hiding. I had no idea about. I'm a happy little child. So my parents really succeeded in trying to give their children a happy time. My father was right. After the landing of the Allied army in Normandy, after the terrible fighting and the life that the army lost, because the Nazis weren't overly happy, of course, not happy at all, that they were going to be pushed back and that they were being fought against. So they landed in June, and in September 1944, they had already liberated northern France and Paris, and then they came into western Belgium, and they went over the border into the Netherlands in September 1944. And something strange happened. We had the earliest onset of a very severe winter, and the 3 rivers, the 3 rivers separate the northern part and the southern part of the Netherlands, and they were frozen. And they didn't have the right equipment to cross the rivers. So they decided to leave the Canadian army camped by the rivers in that cold. And they were going to go on, the rest of the army was going to go on to liberate eastern Belgium and then go into Germany. So the southern part of Holland was liberated, and people were dancing in the streets, so happy that they were finally free. But we had 8 more months of a very severe winter and a Nazi occupation. We were extremely cold. In the winter, we had lost electricity, and we were hungry. Actually, that time is in the Netherlands called the hunger winter, because not just people in hiding were hungry, but so were Dutch people. But for them, it was a little easier to do clandestine kill livestock in farms that they could cook, or chop down trees so they could burn the wood in their fireplaces or stoves. But we in hiding couldn't do that. And one of my memories that I'll share with you that I remember so well is being so cold in that attic that our hands and feet got chilblains. Chilblains still exist today, but there is a cream for it. And of course, we have heated cars and heated houses, and it doesn't last long, but it is extremely painful. My father remembered that the farmers that had to feed their livestock in the 30s had chilblains, but they knew exactly what to do. Horses and cows' urine, the uric acid, can alleviate the pain, and they just used to put their hands and their feet in that urine. Of course, we didn't have horses and cows upstairs in the attic, but what my father made us do is pee in a potty before we went to sleep, and we put our hands and feet in our own pee-pee. We were not told it's yucky and disgusting, but the pain went away, so we could go to sleep without pain. That's one of the memories. I don't have much time left to give you some more. But then came May 5th, 1945 for Amsterdam. It was done in sections, the liberation, but then Amsterdam was liberated. And my father looked back at us and he said, I heard so much noise on the street. We had a little dormer window in that attic, and he kind of pulled a chair up to the window and he opened the window and looked out. And he said, it looks like we're free. And of course, my brother and I had no idea what that meant. My father had some emergency food and he was hungry, so he went to the cupboard, and miraculously, there was one round tin left with tape around it with special nutritious cookies that he had baked a month before. And he ate some of the cookies and said to all of us, you can have as many as you want now, because he knew once we were liberated that actually the food supply lines would be opened and food would come in. So our stomachs were so little that we could only eat really one cookie. But my brother said, so meaning free, the meaning of being free means really eating cookies. We had no concept. My parents tried to explain to us as much as they could. And after a couple of days, we went outside, and my father told us, my brother and myself, to follow him down the stairs. We walked down 4 flights of stairs. My brother and I held on to each other for dear life. We had no idea what to expect. We were so scared. And my father opened the front door, and we walk on the sidewalk, and we are blinded by the light of the sun, what was very scary. And my brother started crying right away, and I mimicked everything that he did. So I cried too. And my brother said, if this is what it means, if this is the meaning of being free, I don't want to be free, I want to go back upstairs. My parents had no idea still what happened to any of their relatives or friends, but they realized that they had succeeded in keeping their children free, were beside themselves, that the kids didn't want to be free. But we had no concept. So they did a lot of explaining, and then we went out again for a walk, again crying. Lots and lots of Dutch people on the street, so happy that we were finally free. People were embracing Canadian soldiers because we were liberated by the Canadian Army. And they were climbing on tanks, and they did all kinds of stuff, and we are standing there and we're crying till one of the Canadian soldiers came over and talked to us. I have no idea what they were saying, what he was saying, because I didn't speak English, but he gave us a Hershey bar. Well, the first time that you eat chocolate is magic. So we couldn't eat the whole bar. We took it home, and the next morning, my brother, the wimpy crier, but he jumped off his mattress and he said, I want to go back outside. He wanted more Hershey bars. So that was for us coming out of hiding, not really understanding what it was all about. My parents made some decisions. They wanted their children to be free. We also left for a couple of years and moved to Sweden, about 2 years after the liberation. But they wanted us to be free children without any fear. What meant they didn't want to have anything to do with religion. Even with the last name of Israëls, they still didn't want to have anything to do with religion. And I found out that I was Jewish when I was 9, when somebody on the street asked me if my parents had a Christmas tree, and I didn't really know what they meant. But, and then I went home, and she said, oh, that's a good thing. You shouldn't have a Christmas tree because you're a Jew. And I came home, and my parents had to explain what that meant. But they said, but we're not part of it, and we're not doing anything religious. And I was a very inquisitive child. I wanted to know what it all meant, but I couldn't ask my parents, because if I opened my mouth and asked the wrong thing, I would get a look, and I knew that I couldn't continue asking. I did ask my mom's best friend, who I was very friendly with, and then I decided, my parents had 3 more children after the war, so I was one of 5. And I decided when I was 15 that I wanted to know more about Judaism, and I called a rabbi, and he told me to speak to my parents, and I waited another year, and then I finally did. And I chose that I wanted to learn what it meant to be a Jew, and I wanted to have the tradition and the religion. I'm the only one in the family. My family still doesn't really want to talk about it. I was brought up with a lot of hatred towards anything German, anything. You know, if my boyfriend had an Volkswagen and would park the Volkswagen in front of my parents' house, that would have been the end of the boyfriend. They felt very, very strict. When we moved to the Washington area in about 30 years ago, the Holocaust Museum had just opened. And I was looking, our children had all left home, and some of them were married, and I was looking for something to do And I thought maybe it would be a good fit to start volunteering at the museum. And I've been there for 30 years now. But I had to go home and talk to my father, who was still alive at that time, and explain to him what I was going to do. And he gave a pretty strange answer for parents who never talked about anything, never even talked about relatives. He said, you need to start speaking, because if you don't, there will come a time that people are going to say, it never happened. So I haven't really stopped since for 30 years. This is very compact, what I'm telling you now. I usually go into more details, but like I said, we're a little time constrained. Why am I really doing it, besides my father's wish that I should? I'm also doing it because I realize that if people hear from a survivor, there's less chance that that person that hears will ever say it never happened. And they will go against people that say it never happened. They're making that up because they will say, I heard it from somebody who was there. So I know it did happen. During the Holocaust, approximately, I say approximately because we still get new numbers in, 12 million people were murdered. Out of the 12 million people, there were 6 million Jews. And out of those 6 million Jews, there were 1.5 million innocent Jewish children who were murdered because they were Jews. And people let it happen. People just were indifferent, they were brainwashed, and they let it happen. We cannot let that continue. Genocide never stopped. You would think if you learn about the Holocaust, the world would know and they would stop. But genocide never stopped. In the late 70s, genocide in Cambodia, 1992, Bosnia, 1994, Rwanda. Then this new century that we're already a quarter into, horrible genocide in African countries, especially in Darfur. We have now the Rohingya people in Burma or Myanmar, and we have Uyghurs in China. And look what is happening in the Middle East. People are being persecuted because they're different. We need to respect everybody. It doesn't matter what the color of your skin is, it doesn't matter what your religion is, it doesn't matter what your language is, and it doesn't matter how you dress, and so many more. We should respect everybody, and then we wouldn't have genocide. And think for ourselves. Yes, the big slogan is never again, but if you think about it, never again are just 2 words that don't mean anything unless we do something about it. We need to think about never again, and we need to have the courage that the heroes had that stood up to help us, and that heroes have today that help other people. We need to stand up and say we cannot tolerate this anymore. And it all comes with education. And I'm really sorry, I'm going to cut this off because I know that there are more speakers. And I'm very grateful that you listened to me. And I also want you to know that, especially during this time of year, I commemorate over 70 relatives, more than 70 relatives, that I never had a chance to know because they were murdered before I came out of hiding. Thank you very much.
Louise, thank you very much for your moving testimony. We do appreciate your inspiring words at the end of your remarks. Thank you.
We will now light candles for all those who perished in the Holocaust and for survivors who are no longer with us. As I call the names of honored guests for the memorial candle lighting, we ask that you please come to the front. I'd like to ask all of our survivors who are here to please come up. Louise Lawrence Israëls, Albert Gary, Ruth Ellenberg Eisenberg, Robert F. Title, Miriam Zuarez, Vivian Hayun Bloodworth, Bryn Huri, We have online Uri Barnea and also Rona Zinger, who's at the Jewish Holocaust Center in Melbourne, who's a survivor from Lithuania, and Harry Marin. We'd also like to ask His Excellency Ambassador Duarte Lopez to please also come up.
Top, please rise. Top shemi shemen top, miyom hamavet miyom hivaldo, sof dabar hakol nishman, et ha'elohim yira, vet mitzvotav shemor, ki ze kol ha'adam, yang lezo chasidim bechabod, ירננו על משכבותם, מנוחה נכונה בשבעה עליונה, תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלת קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיין, מירים ומזהירים, וחילוץ נצמים, וכפרת אשמים, והרחקת פשעם, והקרבת ישעם, וחמלה וחנינה, מלפני שוכן ממונה, וחולקת הבא לחיי העולם הבא, שם תהא מנת ומחיצת וישיבת נפש השם הטוב אל כל הנשמות של 600 רבבות אלפי ישראל, חללי השואה, אנשים ונשים, ילדים וילדות, כולם קדושים וטהורים, בהם גונים וצדיקים, ארזי על בנות ודירי התורה, שנהרגו ונשחטו ושנשרפו ושנקבחו ושנחנקו חיים ושנספו על קידוש השם ביד המרצחים הגרמנים ונוסריהם משאר העמים באושוויץ, ברגן-בלזן, דכאו, מיידנק, Mauthausen, Sobibor, Theresienstadt, Treblinka, ובשאר מחנות השמד, בגלות אירופה, רוח אדוני, תניחנו בגן עדן, תתפטרו מן עלמה, עד אין קרנות אלה מרשמיה וארנה, מלך מלכי מלכים רחמיו, ירחם עליהם, ויחמוס ויחמול עליהם, מלך מלכי מלכים רחמיו יסתירם, ובצל כנפיו ובסתרה לו, לחזות בנום אדוני בקבחלו, לקץ הימין ינעמידם, ומנחל נדניו ישכם, בצרור החיים נשמתם, וישים כבוד מנוחתם, אדוני הוא נחלתם, וילווה עליהם השלום, ועל משכבותם יהיה שלום, ככתיב יבוא שלום ינוחו על משכבותם, הולך נכוחוהם, וכל שוכבי עמו ישראל, בכלל הרחמים והסליחות, וכן יהי רצון ונאמר Amen. Please be seated. The Spanish or Sephardic and Portuguese Jewish presence in the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, the Caribbean islands, Brazil, and North America goes back to the late 16th and early 17th century, when refugees from the Iberian Peninsula, mostly descendants from Jews who had been converted to Christianity in the late 15th and the 16th century, began to arrive and find their way back to Judaism. In the Netherlands in 1639, 3 congregations merged into one. Its name was Congregation Talmud Torah, the community of the Portuguese nation. In 1675, they opened a monumental synagogue, the grandeur of which reflected the affluence of the Amsterdam community. Indeed, these Sephardic Jews have been part of the great currents of Dutch, British, and North American history for more than 400 years. However, these 400 years are not my focus today. Instead, it is the still unfathomable brief 5 years of German occupation which instituted the evils of systematic segregation, rejection, deportation, and almost total extermination. But normal human beings could have imagined this. How could the world allow us, Jews, but mostly honest citizens of the Netherlands, to be treated like vermin? Thousands of passive Dutch spectators watched as the overcrowded trucks and trams filled with innocent Jews went by under heavy guard, and the Dutch did not once protest, not even once. We, the immediate descendants of the people who suffered the horrific consequences of forced conversion to Catholicism and atrocities executed by the Inquisition, while we had received civil rights under Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte and President George Washington, were once again segregated and murdered. On September 15, 1935, the German government enacted the Nuremberger laws because they wanted to put their ideas about race into law. They believed in the false theory that the world is divided into distinct races that are not equally strong and valuable. The Nazis considered Germans to be members of the supposedly superior Aryan race, the strongest and most valuable race of all. According to the Nazis, Jews were not Aryans and belonged to a separate race that was inferior to all other races. The Nazis believed that the presence of Jews threatened the German people, and in order to protect and strengthen Germany, they had to separate Jews from Germans. The Nuremberger laws were an important step towards achieving this goal. Now, I must turn to a subject that is amongst the most fraught in the annals of the Netherlands, namely that of the exemptions. From 1942 until 1944, these exemptions seemed a question of life and death for all Jews. In the very end, even the exemptions proved most of the time worthless, although I would not have been standing here today if not for these same exemptions. In 1942, few could have known that. The trustees of the congregation in Amsterdam did their utmost to avert chaos. The congregational head offices were reorganized into a genealogical research center. Hence, the trustees became involved in a dance macabre with Satan, calling the tune. A small but growing group of privileged men and women emerged above the mass of ordinary Jews. After the spring of '42, congregants could apply for exemptions. These were 5 categories of exemptions. If approved, the identity card would be stamped with the inscription bis auf weiteres freigestellt vom Arbeitsinsatz, exempted from labor service until further notice. Sephardim were given a stamp on their ID cards in the 10,000 series if they applied for immigration to Portugal, and in the 30,000 series for those whose descent was under investigation by the German authorities. To get that, one needed proof or at least 7 Sephardic great-grandparents. The Dutch historian Jacques Presser wrote, and I quote, "It is yet another example of the way the Germans played the cat and mouse game with the Jews. Their main objective was to get rid of the Jews smoothly and by stages, so as to cause the minimum disruption in Dutch public life. To do that, they needed the cooperation of the victims themselves. By granting temporary privileges and exemptions to some, they succeeded in liquidating the rest without too much fuss or bother. In the Netherlands, resistance among those of Sephardic descent was part and parcel of the common struggle against the enemy. But while the population at large could resist or submit, Dutch Jews could only choose between deportation to an unknown place and resistance. It is of utmost importance that you understand the circumstances and the time that these events occurred. Spanish and Portuguese Jewry, which in desperation to avoid deportation, claimed to be of non-Semitic origin, and therefore not linked to the Jewish race. One of the most promising developments to their aid was the compilation of the report entitled Die Herkunft der sogenannten Portugiesischen Juden, which means the origins of the so-called Portuguese Jews. The report consisted of 8 chapters and quoted such authorities as Houston Stuart Chamberlain, who spoke highly of Sephardim while having nothing but scorn for their Ashkenazic co-religionists. My own kinsman, his name was Moses S. Vastias, sent another collection of documents to the Germans entitled Memoria sobre a origem das famílias Vastias la Peña de Medina Lobo dedicada posteridade. The point of this document was to demonstrate how hefty and a mixture of West Gothic blood flowed in our family's ancestry. It also listed noble Iberians, including knights, counts, dukes, barons, whose descendants settled in the Netherlands in the 17th and 18th century. In the summer of 1943, a professor, Dr. A. de Vroo, drew up a report entitled The Anthropological Investigation of the Composition of the So-Called Portuguese Jews in the Netherlands. It was prepared at the Anatomical and Embryological Institute of the University of Amsterdam. Professor de Vroo posed the following questions. A. Must Sephardim in the Netherlands be deemed Jews or as belonging to another race or mixture of races? B. They are deemed Jews. Must they be regarded as indistinguishable from other Jews or as a separate group? C. If they are not deemed Jews, what race or races do they belong to? It is amazing that anybody could be persuaded on the basis of skull measurements that the so-called Spanish and Portuguese Jews could be any stretch of the imagination, be classified as Jews, and that they exhibited strong affinities with the Western Mediterranean races. In the following months, letters flew in all directions, up and including top Nazi officials. But this entire fury came to an abrupt halt on January 26, 1944, when instructed the German leadership and their Dutch collaborators to treat Sephardim as all others and to dispatch the lot of them to the transit camp Westerbork in the east of the Netherlands. It didn't make a difference anymore that some had applied for migration to Portugal or not to be considered of the Jewish race. From a telegram, we see that on February 1st, 1944, Sephardim were rounded up throughout the Netherlands. On February 20th, 1944, a long-mooted inspection finally took place. 273 persons had to parade before the SS Race and Settlement Main Office. The conclusion summed up the overall impression in few words. I quote, subhuman race. As such, they were not to be sent to Spain or Portugal, but treated like all other Jews. The head of the Office for Exemptions, his name was Hans Kallmeier, continued to argue for their non-Jewish racial profile, but he was overruled. The German authorities argued, and I quote, the Sephardim are Jews and have always been so. Photographs purporting to show non-Jewish characteristics are merely due to lighting effects, as anyone who saw the man in the flesh could easily tell. The final conclusion was that since these people were quite unfit for work as a result of inbreeding and soft living, they would have to be put on the train for Theresienstadt. That very weak. And so it happened on February 25th, 44, while crossing the Dutch-German border, they sang their national anthem, and I quote, "My shield and my reliance are you, O God, my Lord. I will trust unto your guidance. O leave me not lacking in discipline, that I may stay a pious servant of you forever, and drive the plagues that try us and tyranny away." End quote. Only very few Jews remained while in hiding. They continued most of their traditions and never ceased worshiping, as you can see of the pictures on the other end of this room. Most, like for instance Anne Frank, were betrayed. They were liberated into freedom. They were murdered and slaughtered in the camps. Only very, very, very few survived. Almost all of the Jews in Westerbork were deported by Dutch railways in cattle wagons and a few in third-class wagons. On the first part of their journey to what would become, for the overwhelming majority, the places of their murder, mainly the extermination camps of Auschwitz and Sobibor. Dutch engine drivers drove these trains to the border, where German drivers took over. The Jews paid for that their own tickets. Approximately 105 Dutch Jews were sent eastwards. They had in the German language the way of expressing it. They didn't say you're going to work or you will be murdered. No, they were sent eastwards in tickets paid for by these people. 100,000 were brutally murdered. The Netherlands is the largest percentage of Jews where people were murdered. It's the first country after Poland. After the war, the enormity of the plunder and pillage perpetrated by the Germans and their collaborators became clear. By the end of World War II, the Nazis managed to kill over 75% of Dutch Jews. This high death toll had a number of reasons. One was the excellent state of Dutch civil records prior to the war. The Dutch state had recorded substantial information on every Dutch national. This allowed the German regime to determine easily who was Jewish, whether fully or partly of Jewish ancestry, simply by accessing that data. Some returned to the Netherlands, and others moved on to Israel, the United States, South Africa, Rhodesia, Australia, and Canada. Let me conclude with the words of His Majesty King William Alexander of the Netherlands in his memorial address of May 4th, 2020. The King publicly acknowledged for the first time that his grandmother, Her Majesty Queen Wilhelmina, and her government failed to protect the country's Jewish population against the Nazis. Aggression, it was aggression and more aggression. He concluded with the following words, and I quote, "The impact of war lingers, and for many generations, even now, 75 years after our liberation, it remains with us. The least we can do is not look away, not look away, not justify it, not erase it, not brush it aside, not normalize something that is anything but normal, and nurture and defend our democracy and the rule of law, because only that can protect us from tyranny and chaos." Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Vaz Dias. Obrigado.
And now I would like to call His Excellency Francisco Antônio Duarte Lopes. Thank you, Ambassador Duarte Lopes. Every Portuguese ambassador I've worked with so far has had one of our Sephardic family names, and you're included in that. So.
Thank you very much. And yes, Lopez is a very common, also a very common Sephardic name. Yes, that's right. Well, I'm honored to be here. And I thank very much the invitation to this Holocaust Remembrance Day event by the Sephardic Heritage International here in DC. I'm going to speak just a little bit, short intervention, both about my country and also about some of my fellow Portuguese citizens around this theme of the exhibition called Coming Out of Hiding. The Jewish community is linked to the 9 centuries of Portuguese history since the nation started, since the beginning until nowadays. And I'm from a part of the country in the interior and next to the border with Spain, where one of the most important figures, probably the most important figure of my hometown, is a man called João Rodrigues, who was a medical doctor and who lived between the 15th and the 16th century, who was born in my hometown and who was by then one of the most important medical doctors around Europe. But precisely in this period of time, between the end of the 15th century and the beginning of the 16th century, Portugal, who had been until then very open society, very proud of the different communities that made up our country, our nation, decided, following what had happened before in Spain, to also to expel their Jewish and Muslim communities by then. And there were, fortunately, other countries, other regions of the world that by then accepted these people, accepted them with open arms, societies that were by then, and some of them continue to be precisely open societies, like the Netherlands, and there's this very close connection between the Portuguese Jewish communities and the Netherlands, but also Denmark, also the Ottoman Empire, also Morocco, as it was mentioned here, also Cabo Verde. Some centuries after this expulsion happened, I'm very proud to say that, as many of you know, some years ago, the Portuguese Parliament, by unanimity, decided to grant Portuguese citizenship to the descendants of the Sephardic Jews that had been expelled by then. Fast forward, fortunately today, Portugal is I'm also proud to say, a very open society. By the way, some of these Portuguese citizens that reacquired the citizenship of their ancestors were also among the victims of the terrorist attacks of the 7th of October, and some of them already died as hostages. Fast forward some centuries to the Second World War. Let me now speak about some of my fellow citizens who played important roles during the Holocaust, during the Second World War. I will mainly tell you today about a fellow diplomat called Aristides Sousa Mendes, who was in 1940 the Portuguese Consul General in Bordeaux, faced with a lot of people that were knocking at the door of the consulate when the Nazi troops were approaching Bordeaux. He had to decide very quickly, and as he said, if he would follow his conscience or if he would follow his instructions that were very restrictive on issuing visas. And these people were in front of the Portuguese consulate, some of them sleeping there for several days because precisely they wanted visas to go to Portugal through Spain and then to go somewhere else, the majority of them precisely here to the US, to be sure, again, that they could come out of hiding. Aristides Sousa Mendes, this Portuguese diplomat, decided to follow his conscience and to issue visas, thousands of visas, the majority of them against instructions from the Foreign Ministry in Lisbon, because Portugal by then was a neutral country in the Second World War. So what happened to him after issuing these visas, saving thousands of lives, mostly of Jews, but not only of Jews, of persecuted people? He was expelled from the Foreign Ministry. He was given a very reduced pension, and he died after some years in a very, very difficult, very dire financial situation. Like him, there were two other Portuguese diplomats, both posted in Budapest, who also saved some Jews, as other diplomats from many other countries around the world. And both Aristides Sousa Mendes and the Portuguese ambassador in Budapest, Ambassador Sampaio Garrido, are recognized today as writers among the nations by the Yad Vashem Museum. Similarly, there was a Portuguese Catholic priest in Rome who is also recognized as writers against among the nations, by the Yad Vashem, who during the Second World War decided to hide in his house several Jews that because of that act were saved. I'm of course very proud that these four people were Portuguese citizens. I'm very proud, especially that some of them were Portuguese diplomats. But I have to say, honestly and humbly, that I don't know if nowadays, faced with this difficult choice between conscience and instructions, between conscience and the formal duties, if I would be able to behave as nobly as they did. I leave you with these references to my fellow citizens, some of them fellow diplomats, hoping also that we extract some lessons from the behavior of these noble people, and nowadays we would all be able to protect people that are persecuted, to protect innocent people, and to protect people that are victims of terrorism and of violence everywhere in the world, whatever the ethnicity, whatever the religion, whatever the country of the region they are coming from. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Duarte Lopes. Thank you for the most fitting remarks. Muito obrigado.
Obrigado. First, I'd like to say, since October 7th, Jewish people have had to combat an alarming rise in anti-Semitism, and are responding with a surge of Jewish pride, as expressed in November's Washington rally for Israel and the Israeli hostages held by Hamas. I would now like to welcome Abby Talmud, the Jewish Community Coordinator at the Embassy of Israel in Washington, to share her remarks.
Good evening, everyone. Distinguished honored and guests and Holocaust survivors. My name is Abby Talmud, and I'm the Jewish Community Coordinator at the Embassy of Israel in Washington, D.C. I am honored to speak tonight at the annual, Congressional Commemoration of the International Holocaust Memorial event, and I'm honored to speak on behalf of the Embassy. As we sit here tonight, there are still 136 people, including United States citizens, being held hostage by Hamas in Gaza. Today is their 103rd day being held captive, and 103rd day since October 7th, the biggest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. When we say never again is now, we mean it. And we mean it with our full heart. We do not want, nor will we allow, another Holocaust to happen. Dr. Tal Becker stated in his recent speech at the International Court of Justice on behalf of Israel, "Never again for all people" is a slogan. For Israel, it's the highest moral obligation. On October 7th, 2023 morning, the State of Israel and the Jews were celebrating the holiday of Simchat Torah. Thousands of Hamas militants breached Israeli sovereign territory by sea, land, and air, invading over 20 communities, bases, and the music festival Nova. Hamas terrorists entered Israel, murdered, raped, beheaded, burned children and adults alive, and took hostages. Iran and its proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, are trying to destroy Jewish communities as the Nazis did. They tried to repeat history on October 7th, but we will not allow them to do so. We want to thank the United States for its continuous support in this war. Here in the United States, as you've heard, we have seen an almost 400% increase in global anti-Semitism since October 7th. Jews worldwide are scared of what could happen again. Jewish students on universities and school campuses are being harassed, and Jewish people in general are being harassed when they expose their Jewish identity and outwardly share their Jewish pride. It is our duty to keep acting to release the hostages from Hamas in Gaza and bring them all home now. And it is our responsibility to remember and never forget what happened to the Jews during the Holocaust by continuing to push for Holocaust education and combating all kinds of anti-Semitism, as it is stating in the IHRA definition, as well as enacting the White House strategy for combating anti-Semitism. Thank you, SHIN DC, for bringing us all here tonight together to hear from the survivors and from members of Congress. I'm Israel Chai.
Thank you, Abby Talmud. We acknowledge the people who are here today from Unacceptable DC, who meet in front of the Red Cross each Sunday to raise awareness of the situation of the hostages in Gaza. Aviva Kempner. At this time, we will play a video of Her Excellency Brigitte Tazelaar, Ambassador of the Netherlands to the U.S., which she has prepared for today's commemoration.
Distinguished members of Congress, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's a privilege for me to address the Congressional Holocaust Commemoration. I would like to thank the Sephardic Heritage International for organizing this important event, and I regret that I'm traveling and therefore I'm not able to attend the commemoration in person. The Holocaust is a defining moment in world history. It has shown the horrific events that anti-Semitism can lead to. We've seen it in our very own country, the Netherlands. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism did not magically disappear at the end of World War II. Trivializing, distorting, and denying the Holocaust continue to fuel anti-Semitism, damaging the collective memory of the Holocaust. This is still happening today. Looking at my own country, 12% of Dutch history teachers indicate that they sometimes receive negative reactions from students in response to lessons about the Holocaust. Such reactions have caused a quarter of those teachers to be extra cautious when discussing this topic, and 3% even avoids it. This is unacceptable. The horrific attack by Hamas on October 7, 2023 has ripped open the wound of the Holocaust. We've seen a sharp rise in anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and intolerance in its wake, including in our respective countries. It's therefore essential that we, together, combat anti-Semitism. And one way of doing this is through commemoration. So few Holocaust survivors are still alive. It is essential that we write down their stories and pass them on to younger generations. I'm therefore pleased that the Multicultural Jewish Art Museum, a project by Sephardic Heritage International, is presenting the exhibition called Coming Out of Hiding. It documents personal stories of the Holocaust in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, we have an online database named Oorlogsbronnen, or War Sources in English. It details the names and stories of those who were captured, deported, and or killed during the Second World War. And we're proud that on March 10, the Holocaust Museum in Amsterdam will open its doors to the public. Today, we will hear from two people with stories about the Netherlands. Louise Lawrence Israëls is a survivor from the Netherlands. And Rabbi Solomon Vaz-Diaz is the son of a survivor from the Netherlands, as well as a former sexton and cantor of the Portuguese synagogues in Amsterdam and New York. A large part of Jewish culture in the Netherlands was lost due to the Holocaust. The survivors and their descendants have rebuilt this cultural heritage to the best of their abilities. Even though Jewish life is an active part of Dutch society today, Jewish culture and traditions are unknown to many, partly due to the small size of the Jewish community in the Netherlands after the war. It's therefore important to acquaint people with Jewish life through art, film, music, and cultural exchange as a means of combating anti-Semitism. Across the Atlantic too, we must unite in our fight against anti-Semitism, hate speech, and intolerance. The Netherlands Embassy in DC proudly presents the Anne Frank Award for Human Dignity and Tolerance. The award highlights the work and dedication of individuals and organizations that seek to stamp out intolerance and anti-Semitism in the US. Last year, the prize was awarded to Senator Ben Cardin. We have a long road ahead when it comes to fighting anti-Semitism, but I'm convinced that by joining forces and through important initiatives in our respective societies, like the one today, we can and will succeed. Thank you.
We are grateful for the ambassador's important remarks. Thank you. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce the children of Harry Marin, who will speak on his behalf. Harry was another Dutch Holocaust survivor, and he is represented here today by his son David Marin and his daughter Debbie Rumanoff. Harry will be joining us from Indianapolis, Indiana, via the live stream. Thank you.
So we're two of the three children of Harry Marin, who is a Dutch Jewish child Holocaust survivor. Really our focus today is just on his story and his experiences in the Holocaust, so it's not going to be very long. When the Nazis invaded the Netherlands in May 1940, there were approximately 140,000 Jews that were living there. This number included 15,000 German Jews who had fled there to escape Nazi persecution. So our grandparents, Mark and Margaret Marin, were among those German Jews that had fled to the Netherlands. Their story was documented in an interview conducted in the 80s, and it's located in the archives of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. Of the 140,000 Jews that had been living in the Netherlands, 75% perished in the Nazi-perpetrated genocide. Our father who was born in December 1941 in Amsterdam, was born in December of 1941 in Amsterdam. As the Nazis began registering the Jews, his parents arranged for a non-Jewish woman to hide our father at 307 Nassaukade near the Single Canal in Amsterdam. So that was our father in hiding. Soon afterwards, our grandparents also went into hiding, moving from place to place. Towards the end of the war, they found refuge with a family in Broek en Waterland in the Dutch countryside, with whom they remained in contact for many decades after the war. In June 1944, someone betrayed our father's hiding place, and the 2.5-year-old child was taken by the Nazis to Westerbork, a transit camp for the Dutch Jews, and it's located in northern Holland.
Because our grandfather had taken great pains to create a false identity for our father under the alias Janneman, his background and his real name were unknown to the Nazis. Westerbork included 52 children with unknown identities. The Nazis called them unbekannte Kinder, unknown children. There's actually a book about them and a movie, the book by Daphne Meyer and the film by Annette Apon. Unfortunately for most of us in the room, both are in Dutch.
The movie has English subtitles.
The movie does have English subtitles, and there is actually someone, from what I understand, in Cincinnati, which is where I currently live, who has translated the book, and I believe on my phone we do have a copy of it. In September 13th, 1944, the unknown children were transported out of Westerbork on the very last train to leave. They were transported exactly 10 days after Anne Frank left to go to Auschwitz. Their train, according to the Nazi records, was also destined for Auschwitz. However, through an act of God, it was diverted to Bergen-Belsen. A 9-month-old baby, however, perished during that train ride. 1 month after their arrival in Bergen-Belsen, the remaining 51 unknown children were transported to Theresienstadt. There is where they remained for the rest of the time until Theresienstadt was finally liberated by the Soviet Army in May 9th of 1945. Following the war, our grandparents came out of hiding and began searching for our father. Miraculously, they found him and they were reunited in Eindhoven. Our 3-year-old father at the time was suffering from typhus. The family stayed in Amsterdam until 1951 and continued living as Jews. At that point, they emigrated to the United States out of growing fear that Europe was being basically the Soviet aggression in Eastern Europe. The Holocaust was devastating to our family. All of my father's grandparents, 2 of his aunts, 2 of his uncles, all perished in Auschwitz and in Sobibor. Our grandparents never really discussed the war. They never really discussed what happened before the war. They were ashamed. They were honestly very much disgusted and embarrassed. And until we were almost 20 years old, we believed that our grandmother was born in Rotterdam in Holland. In reality, we learned she wasn't born there. She was born in Dusseldorf, Germany. After our grandparents had passed away, when we were in our 30s, possibly 40s, I don't know, we're getting a little old, we learned that in reality, both families, our grandmother's family and our grandfather's family, had emigrated at a certain point in time from Poland to escape the Russian pogroms and moved across and ended up in Holland. We grew up knowing that our father had survived the war. We grew up knowing that he came from Holland, and that's all we knew until we were older.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, David and Debbie, for sharing your father Harry's inspiring story and for giving him joy by making sure that his narrative is not forgotten here in the nation's capital. And thank you for making the trip from Indiana and Ohio to do so.
We will now end with His Excellency Stuart Eizenstat. Ambassador Eizenstat is the chair of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, special negotiator for the Claims Conference, and former U.S. ambassador to the EU, among other prominent positions.
On this solemn day of remembrance, it's critical to learn lessons from the Holocaust. First, it was not inevitable, but it was facilitated by the world's indifference to the fate of Jews, an indifference we must not repeat in the face of aggression today again in Ukraine. Hitler's original goal was not the final solution, but to make Germany Judenrein, free of Jews, and he proceeded step by methodical step, gauging German and world reaction to his gradual disenfranchisement of Jews. Second, we must do everything possible to help survivors live out their remaining years in a dignity they did not enjoy in their youth. Germany has paid over $90 billion to survivors since 1952, some $9 billion since 2009 when I joined Susan Avejan's revered father Roman Kent in negotiating for the Jewish Claims Conference with Germany on behalf of survivors. For this year, our budget from Germany is some $1.2 billion. In 2022, Germany made a special payment to 8,500 Holocaust survivors remaining in war-torn Ukraine. The Holocaust was not only the greatest genocide in history, it was the greatest theft in history, done with the same ruthless efficiency as the murders. It was a major part of removing all vestiges of Jewish life in Europe, root and branch. The mass confiscations included homes, businesses, bank accounts, insurance policies, personal possessions, 600,000 paintings, and the exploitation of slave labor. Most of the property has never been returned or compensated. There has been progress, however, in art recovery, though much more remains to be done. It's now the 25th anniversary of the Washington Principles on Nazi-confiscated art, which I negotiated in 1998 as Undersecretary of State with 44 countries. We've worked with 14 countries to produce a series of best practices on what we've learned over these past 25 years, and will announce them at a conference in March sponsored by the World Jewish Restitution Organization and the State Department. But today, more than 80% of survivors in Central and Eastern Europe live in or near poverty, 35% in Israel, and 30% here in the United States, the richest nation in the world. This is unacceptable for elderly survivors who suffered so grievously in their childhood under Nazi oppression. Third, and increasingly critical, is to remember those who perished and honor those survivors who remain through Holocaust education. Congress has taken a positive step through the 2020 Never Again Holocaust Education Act, appropriating $10 million to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, whose governing council I chair. We're developing curricula for schools around the country, and in a new initiative called Beyond Our Walls, in partnership with the American Library Association, we're bringing traveling exhibitions to libraries in some 100 smaller cities and towns who have had little access to Holocaust education. And to their great credit, in our claims conference negotiations with Germany, the German government has now agreed to fund over $160 million through 2027 in worldwide Holocaust education. The U.S. must set a better example. In January 2000, we were leaders, along with Swedish Prime Minister Göran Persson, in creating what has now evolved into the 35-nation International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance to promote Holocaust education. And yet, only 22 of our 50 states have any mandatory Holocaust education in their school systems. I hope members of Congress in states without Holocaust education can encourage your officials to develop Holocaust education programs. This would be a fitting commemoration on this Holocaust Remembrance Day. Thank you for letting me address you.
At this time, I'll invite everybody to please stand for the Star Spangled Banner and the Hatikvah, performed by Ian Pomerantz and Gersh Stravinsky.
Thank you, Ian and Gersh. Just want to say, as we end, we can combat anti-Semitism by sharing all of our narratives and how our stories shape our multifaceted identities. This is what this commemoration does. This is what SHIN DC does. This is what the Multicultural Jewish Arts Museum aims to do. Nuremberg laws did not define the wife of Salomon as we see in today's art exhibit. She knew who she was and through that sense took care of a hidden Jewish community. Like the wife of Salomon Mendes Coutinho, like Al Munzer, whose story is up on the wall, Louise Lawrence Israëls and others, perhaps we are all coming out of hiding each day, shaping and sharing our diverse narratives, including through commemoration. We hope that you'll join us at our next exhibition, which is at the Luce Center here in Washington, D.C., featuring Indian Jewish artist Siona Benjamin. So again, thank you, all of you, and look forward to keep connecting.
Fast forward to the 20th century, when almost all of the Jewish community was annihilated by the Nazis. Only about 10% of the Portuguese Jews survived. There are still no words for the atrocities that happened back then, and what an incredible blow this was for the community. And the truth is that even today, 75 years later, the community is still struggling and dealing with the trauma from the 40s. Today, there are about 500 Portuguese Jews left in Amsterdam. There are 3 synagogues supporting this community that also attracts other Sephardic Jews from the Middle East and Arab countries. We are still a struggling community, still damaged from the war. Relatively few Portuguese Jews are still active in the community, and for many decades after the war, we were just getting smaller and remained isolated. And so, I'm concluding. 5 years ago, I started Bendigamos. It is an ultimate attempt to revive the old glory. Instead of being dominated by the pain from the war, we put 100% of our time and effort into reconnecting all of our people with the community and with our traditions through services, education, and social events. We have a long way to go, but we are growing quickly with many hundreds of affiliates, and we are very positive about the future. We are very thankful that we are becoming more connected to the other Portuguese congregations in the world, and now also to the Portuguese embassy to the US. We see an incredible potential, and we are offering and looking for support to reach our full potential. We hope that together with all of you, we can really revive the glory days of Portuguese Jews in Holland and all over the world. Thank you.